Hello everybody and welcome back to the Overlap Breakdown channel. As always, I'm joined by my co-host Umay, who's a professional football scout and analyst. And today we're here to analyse Jeremie Frimpong as his move to Liverpool has been here we goed. Okay, so welcome back to the channel. Obviously, Liverpool are moving very fast in the market, and obviously the Monday we're recording this, they have just been concretely linked to Kerkez for Bournemouth as well on the other side. But today we're going to touch mainly on Frimpong. We will cover a little bit of Kerkez, but just out of the blocks, you're a City fan. He come through at City quite interestingly, and obviously because of that, he will class as a homegrown player. I think he's roughly around 35 million euros release clause. And there's a lot to talk about him and his profile and some of the weaknesses that he has maybe in the public perception, and we're going to try and put that to bed. But can you just go through what you make of Frimpong as a player? Because I've watched Leverkusen for a couple of years now under Xavi Alonso, and in terms of his role in that team, which is much more aggressive, which we'll talk about, he has been phenomenal for them. Yeah,
I mean, brilliant player and somebody who has been central to their success, probably their most successful period in modern in their modern history. And obviously they play with a three at the back. He plays in sort of this wing back role, but in his execution of that wing back role, if you try and map that to other systems, I think he'll certainly be able to play as a right back in a 4, but also potentially as a winger in a 4-3-3, for example. And he's an electric player, lightning quick, and not that he looks sort of clumsy, but he has an unorthodox approach in trying to beat pressure, but he does get away from his man time and time again. And that's even in sort of central areas here, but particularly down the line. He's got a good cross on him, and he runs in behind and tries to get on the end of chances himself. So he's a real wild card of a player, but technical quality fairly high, and a really intelligent player in terms of his movement as well.
Yeah, so obviously, as usual, I'm going to go through some of the data now to give you a general overview of what he's been doing for Bayer Leverkusen this season. So we're going to start off with his open play touch map. And as you can see, he's got 23%, 18% and 15%. I interestingly want to talk about, he's actually got an 8% of his touches coming in this little zone here, just right of the box. And one of his best characteristics for me is actually his ability to underlap players and overlap players. He's got really good movement off the ball on both sides of his winger. And I think that suits Mohamed Salah, who can create from the line but can also go inside and be a goal threat. And I think his combination and his connection with Mohamed Salah will be something that next season I think will blossom very well, especially when Frimpong's being played against them more deep defences and they're looking for, they've used Szoboszlai quite a lot to get around Salah and drag players away from him and get around him and create little overloads on that side. But now they've also got another player who's very different to Trent Alexander-Arnold, which we will talk about. Conor Bradley's got the same sort of ferocity in the final third, constantly wants to get around. But Frimpong's movement is much more intelligent, in my opinion, in terms of doing both underlap and overlap, providing that overload and actually having the final ball quality. So we can see here from his chance creating map this season, we can see virtually what we've just spoken about. A lot of chances created coming from just outside the box, but a little bit wider, but also some a little bit narrower, showing that dynamism again to get inside and outside. And the same with his long progressive carries, which is one of his strongest attributes. Leverkusen are a team that want to bring the press on and then, attack fast big space. Third man combinations is a massive pattern of this Leverkusen team, which if you don't know, if the ball's at the keeper here, goes to the centre back, then we go bang and we use the third man and he'll make some sort of a movement off the ball that's in unison with this sort of passing, just for the audience to know. So in terms of arriving into that space, Frimpong is one of the most impressive players for Leverkusen that I would say at doing this because of how fast he is, as we mentioned. But his long progressive carries, we can see, there is a massive cluster on the right-hand side of the pitch, which is, 10 metre plus carries. So we're not talking small spaces, tight dribbling. We're talking breaking through, big, long, progressive carries, massive stretches down the line. So in terms of how you would stack him up against their current fullback options, which obviously we know that well documented that Trent Alexander-Arnold's going to probably leave to go to Real Madrid, and Conor Bradley's just signed a long-term contract extension. If they're to be the fullbacks next season, how do you imagine their balance being, Conor Bradley and Frimpong? And, what's the difference between their skill sets and what can one offer that the other can't?
Yeah, so like you mentioned, both fairly astute and strong on the overlap. No, but just generally running down here, Conor Bradley is sort of a cross-focused player. I think he's a brilliant crosser, actually. And so is Jeremie Frimpong. So in terms of those things, that they're fairly similar. However, Jeremie Frimpong offers something a little bit different. Just before I move on and break down sort of what Jeremie Frimpong's role is in terms of his skill set, I do think Szoboszlai in that right central midfield area has defended really well in the season gone by, and he's sort of facilitated a lot of this success for Liverpool, in my opinion. When that press is bypassed, he'd always run back and kind of ensure that that defence retained its structure, even though he was pressing high as well. So the amount of yards that he put in this season was ridiculous. So having players who can kind of underlap, as Frimpong can, or overlap, leaving him to sit in a little bit, saves his legs, as well as ensuring a little bit sort of more balance in that side. So with Frimpong, obviously he can go high and wide, but with his movement underlapping, it'll allow Mo Salah to kind of have space 1v1 and drag some of those 2v1s away from him in those wide areas. I've seen goals as well scored from Frimpong when he's running beyond the last line. Even when he does underlap, it's not only to drag a player away, but sometimes he receives these passes coming in, almost these sort of diagonal slide passes, and then he is able to cut the ball back again. And we know from Liverpool's side, they do have good players edge of the box who can put the ball away. McAllister in particular comes to mind when I think of that. And then also in these areas where the ball does go back here, his speed is massively impressive, and it also adds to the fact that he can sort of back press and try and win the ball back, even if he's a little bit out of position, or even if it's not really his zone, but he'll just come back and try and anticipate and try and win that ball early, so his team can kind of retain that structure. So Frimpong kind of has all three facets, I think.
Yeah, in the final third. Very, very versatile attacker in 100%. For a fullback.
And Conor Bradley, although he's brilliant sort of high and wide, probably a little bit more astute, deeper, I would say, than Frimpong. But yeah, generally I think this sort of underlapping area, plus this 1v1 quality that Frimpong has out wide, means that he's probably a little bit more varied than Bradley for right backs at Liverpool.
Yeah, so I've got a data set here. Before we go on to talk about something that me and Umir have noticed, which is something that maybe Arne Slot's trying to evolve Liverpool into, and maybe what they're going to look like next season as they become more of a slot team. We're going to look at the per game data between Conor Bradley, Trent Alexander-Arnold and Frimpong now. So we can see that per 90, Frimpong scores more goals, he's got more assists, his expected assists are just behind Trent Alexander-Arnold, which again are showing that sort of attack first nature from the fullback position. He's actually having almost half the amount of passes that Trent Alexander-Arnold and Conor Bradley are in comparison to Frimpong. That he's averaging 23 passes a game successfully, which is again showing that he's maybe not so much of a build-up player, which again we'll speak about in a minute, but he's someone who's arriving late into the box and he's having less touches almost as an attacker would. And that's how Xavi Alonso's profiled him quite well as well. I think Kasunu in his first season used to play wide centre-half, he'd push to right back, he'd go forward. But when looking at his dribbles attempted, his open play crosses, we can see his touches in the opposition box, all of them are higher than the other three, the other two, showing that again, very attacking player. Now, I want you to speak about this before we go into the build-up stuff, because we just mentioned it off camera. Dribble pass by opponents, he's at 0.6 per 90, and I know he's playing a little bit further up than a traditional fullback would, but in comparison to Trent and Bradley, they're at 2.1 and 1.7. What do you make of Frimpong's 1v1 defending, and how do you assess him as a player? Because I think when people have been profiling him, it's the number one concern that a lot of people have had. How does he defend? Yeah,
so I think you're always going to have reservations, or people are always going to have reservations about a wing back in a 5 moving to a 4 at the back system. But I think it's probably doing him a little bit of a disservice. There's a few big 1v1 matchups that I've had the time to look through each dual 1v1, and even though he sort of doesn't look as physical as his counterparts on the wing, his speed is ridiculously impressive, and he gives himself a yard, and I think wingers often know, because he's so quick, they kind of don't want to go down the line against him. So in a way, that kind of protects him a little bit. Secondarily, I think this is supported by the fact that at Leverkusen they play in a 5, but somebody often does come and support him in those areas. Irrespective of that, he does delay the winger a lot. He doesn't let the winger kind of get a run on him or get the separation to play a pass or a cross early. So he's close enough to apply that pressure, and he's got enough distance to where if they do try and run on him with his speed, he'll get back and kind of recover. And there's been a few occasions where he has been beaten, but he does always try and get back in position with his pace. I think generally he presses really tenaciously. I think that counts in his out of possession qualities. At times in that tenacious pressing, he can be victim to kind of getting turned a little bit just because he is so aggressive in that pressure. But generally, I think that's a big positive because Liverpool do press quite collectively. So I think especially if you have Szoboszlai on that side, on that right-hand side, supporting him a little bit, I'm not massively concerned with his 1v1 defending, especially against big wingers in a settled defensive shape. I actually think I probably feel he's more comfortable than Trent in that regard, based on the 1v1 matchups that I've seen him playing. But obviously the Premier League's a different sort of physical
different
monster.
kettle of fish.
Yeah, exactly. And the only question that I have in my mind is if he's contributing to the attack so much, will he have the legs later on in the game to allow his pace to kind of make up for the few occasions where he is beat? But generally he's quite a strong defender for his frame and for his reputation. I think he's better than people give him credit for.
Yeah, I think Leverkusen, when I've watched them, they've almost blocked in a 4-4-2 sometimes, and Grimaldo and Frimpong have sometimes played as a left and right midfielder, showing that obviously he wants to get him maybe further forward for the counter-attacks, but obviously for the pressures and maybe not have him in the back line to go 1v1. But he's definitely more he's comfortable in, swinging back round and defending 1v1. If you're enjoying the video and want more tactical analysis and podcasts, please press the subscribe button below and hit the bell to enable post notifications. I want to move on now into the final thing before we touch on Kerkez, which me and you just spoke about. Against Arsenal, we noticed something a bit interesting for this Liverpool team that we think that Slot is trying to bring through. So Klopp then. That Slot is trying to bring through into this team. And we want to touch on the build-up. So now in build-up this season, Liverpool have mainly used a 4-2 build-up with Gravenberch and McAllister sitting deeper with Szoboszlai usually going and standing here, and they bring the other 9 down, and then you'd usually get this almost a Zerbi-like 4-2-4 or 2-4-4 or whatever the hell. So one thing that Liverpool did against Arsenal, which we've not seen quite a lot of, was actually Alisson, if the goalkeeper kick is down here, we go.
Because they've tended to have their fullbacks deep. Yeah, so really deep.
Usually the fullbacks have been virtually on the side of the box and the same line as the keeper and the centre-halves. Now, against Arsenal, what we actually noticed was when Alisson Becker actually steps up to become the centre-back, that means that Robertson can be pushed on and that shifts out the left centre-half here. And what we have now is a spare man, and we have a 4 almost overload on the left-hand side. Now, I think this really suits the right-hand side to do this with Frimpong, and I want to show you why. So if we can imagine that this is Alisson again, we've got the 4-2 again in build-up. If we did this on the right-hand side, Frimpong gets a bit more forward, Salah tucks inside, Szoboszlai narrows, move the right centre-half over, Alisson steps up. That build-up sort of pattern really suits Frimpong. As we mentioned before, he's not got a lot of passes in the open play, but if we can get him high on the line, then he's a very, very effective attacker in the final third. And I think allowing Mohamed Salah to drift infield is obviously where he plays his best football, coming on that left foot. And if you were to profile this, do you think this is something that we could see more from Liverpool as Slot looks to, put his stamp on this team and Liverpool want to really use that goalkeeper as an outfielder? Yeah,
well, 100%. I think the use of Alisson in the situation is important. I think with that player who's moved out is probably a touch inside, and they try and still, although it looks like they're building one-sided and they completely are, they are still trying to entice the opposition towards the centre to get Frimpong as the free man in big space. We've seen this with PSG as well. I think maybe the PSG games have inspired the methodology of Liverpool and Slot a little bit in this situation, because if you try and build down one side, you involve your keeper, you involve your right centre-back, you involve that central midfielder, you still have one of the other midfielders there as an option, and the intention is to try and bounce that pass into these forward-facing fullbacks, and it'll lead us nicely onto Kerkez in a moment. But with Frimpong or someone like Kerkez on that side, if you can build up kind of towards one side but still through the centre, entice a lot of pressure, have your fullbacks creep forward, and then when they receive the ball facing forward, they've got this engine to drive all the way up the pitch. Your wings are narrow as well. It's a brilliant system in theory that kind of gets the most of these players. It pins defences back, and it also gets a lot of the opposition players out of the game. You've kind of got the back line versus your attacking line. And we know how strongly Premier League teams want to block the middle of the pitch, so they're going to kind of jump on that opportunity. It is risky. If you lose the ball, then they've got a chance directly at your goal from 20, 30 yards out. But if you've got the technical quality and these rotations to, and again, it's sort of De Zerbi-like again, to entice pressure and find these players. Once you find them, then you're ready to go, especially with your players like Mo Salah, who, again, don't need to track back, don't need to do these hard and heavy carries up the field. And then they're in goal-scoring position with these brilliant flying fullbacks.
Obviously, I think it's one of my favourite things in football, having flying fullbacks. I think they're honestly the best profile of player to watch. And I was just thinking then of like the PSG team, as you was mentioning, Hakimi, Mendes. It's so relentless, and Frimpong Kerkez has a bit of that to it. And I want you to touch on, now we've reset the build-up to what Liverpool are currently doing, which is obviously the 4-2-4 or whatever. Can you explain to me how they're being linked to Kerkez and how he would also benefit from this system? You mentioned, really interestingly, what they could do with maybe the left winger and the left back. Could you run through why Kerkez could also add a similar level of quality to this team?
100%. So I think if we're trying to profile how this team might look, if Liverpool to get all of the signings, I think it's always important to look at who they're linked to. Not only are they linked to these two flying fullbacks, but they're also linked to Xavi Simons and Wirtz. And obviously they can play as third midfielders, but if I think to the heritage sides of Jurgen Klopp at Liverpool, they've often played with two centre-backs, three fairly pragmatic central midfielders, two sort of inside wingers, and then flying fullbacks. And again, I think culturally that makes sense for this Liverpool side. I think Slot's interpretation of that would be different, but instead of thinking Xavi Simons or Wirtz playing as a midfielder, which they certainly could do, I'm thinking, could they possibly be one of these left wing options? And having them sort of move a bit centrally. Again, these are players who are brilliant passers, pass-first players, and that's a quality you need to replace when Trent goes, but you don't necessarily need to do it with your right back, because Trent goes, where are you getting your sort of deep passing from? You can get it from a player like Wirtz for sure. If that's the case, then you get Kerkez, who bombs forward. You kind of get your two centre-backs there doing build-up responsibilities. You get your three midfielders who can at times push forward and join in attack, and you get Frimpong high and wide as well. So you've got your three midfielders who have been brilliant this season. You've got McAllister here, for example, and Szoboszlai, who can push up forward in that same way and be that sort of sixth man that we've seen at times against back fives. And then you've got your flying fullbacks here. You've got your sort of winger / midfielder who can play these crosses. And I think generally they'll look to kind of build up on this side. And then on the underloaded side, imagine you find your Frimpong and your Mo Salah. It's ridiculously strong over on this side. Szoboszlai, again, brilliant at covering defensively and also sort of pushing forward. But I think generally that's a very strong setup, and you can see why you get some of your best players in these areas. The last thing I'll mention actually is, across all of the videos on this channel, I've spoken about how fullbacks nowadays are the players that get the most space in big games for teams with a lot of possession. And these two players, if they were to be Kerkez and Frimpong, arriving even in these areas, with your wingers still high and wide, have the quality to, one, get in those spaces unmarked. It's hard to pick up players running from so deep. And then they have the ability to either cross and cut back to someone like McAllister or chip in with goals themselves. So it's a very strong setup in theory. When you look at it all mapped out like that, and I think the likes of Gakpo and Diaz could still do that. They're obviously not as strong passers. Gakpo's fairly astute in that regard, but generally, if that's the blueprint, you can kind of see the vision for a very strong,
scary
next season for Liverpool. And
I think obviously now they missed out last summer, and a lot of people were questioning it. Now they've gone on to win the league, and they've bought themselves so much time and resources, especially to go and have this summer. It's looking scary. I'm not going to lie. I think Wirtz and Simons, as you just said there, like the profile perfectly for them half winger positions. You know, think of Xabi Alonso's Leverkusen, where Wirtz plays his best zones. Szoboszlai can, help out in build-up, can join the attack. Frimpong and Salah both can play inside, outside. Number 9's still a question, obviously, but Kerkez loves to attack space.
Good.
Very good. And do you know what, when you were speaking about Kerkez, then I remember him at St James's Park and he makes this one like 80-yard dash up the pitch. And I'm just like, if that's for Liverpool. And you were saying they get the most space. He arrives for, I think it's a cross or a goal.
Yeah.
He arrives on his own in acres of it.
Well, who's going to pick up a guy running from his box?
Yeah,
80
especially
yards?
when that's like Wirtz or Simmons as
Yeah,
well,
yeah.
or even like a Gakpo or a Diaz.
Yeah.
Like that's scary. And
because your winger's not going to track him all the way.
yeah.
So then whose responsibility is it? If it's one of your midfielders, then you've got 3 brilliant midfielders who can pick up the ball edge of the box unmarked as well.
I know that Arne Slot's not purely responsible for the recruitment, and I know it's a lot of Michael Edwards and the computer guys, as we like to call them. I was really interested to see what they were going to do straight away. I wanted to see what the Slot vision looked like, and as a Manchester United fan, I'm worried.
Yeah,
I'm worried again. Yeah. I think this team could go again.
Yeah.
With the names are being linked to, the profiles are being linked to, and I know they've only got one here we go, but this is Liverpool who've got a lot of money to spend. Yeah. They're the current Premier League champions, and they're just tied down to the greatest Premier League players of all time.
Salah, like as brilliant as he is, tying him down is probably more important than
and getting more legs around him as well, especially.
Yeah.
He has to do even less running now.
Yeah.
Spooky. Right, thank you very much for watching. If you did enjoy, please don't forget to like, comment and follow the channel, and we'll be back next week for some more analysis. Thank you.